Hello everyone, Richard here at Calvin Wazoo, bringing you another video. Today I'm going to show some recent acquisitions that fall within the genre of punk, post-punk, grunge. I really think that grunge, or what most people call grunge, is nothing more than punk music with better fuzz and distortion and song structures that are a little more complicated than what most people associate with punk music. A lot of people, will reduce the notion of punk music down to very simplistic one or two chord short songs that structurally are not very complex, very standard, verse, chorus kind of structure, or, something like that. And a lot of punk music is very much like that. However, there were many, and that's how many punk bands started, because, there were a lot of people who started punk bands who were not very talented, and I don't mean that necessarily in a derisive way, but they initially were not that talented at with the instruments that they started with, but they got better. They became quite talented. And they still were a punk band, but their songs became more creative and more complex. I mean, The Clash really started off with very simple song structures, but later their song structures became much more complex, and yet they expanded into some other areas, but they were still punk. And a lot of punk bands expanded into things like reggae and dub and things like that. And speaking of The Clash, this is a new acquisition that I got, a new reissue of The Clash's second album, Give 'Em Enough Rope. I like this album. It's not as strong as their debut, and it certainly was not as strong as subsequent albums, particularly London Calling. I mean, London Calling is just an amazing, amazing album. As I've mentioned in another video, Rolling Stone magazine mentioned that London Calling was, for The Clash, what Beggar's Banquet was for the Rolling Stones. But anyway, it's got some, big hits on here like Tommy Gun and, Drug Stabbing Time, Stay Free, but a lot of other songs, a little bit weaker than perhaps what was out on the debut, but still, a good album worth having. They're reissuing this now. This is a Canadian punk band, D.O.A. Their first album being reissued now in nice heavy-duty vinyl as well, a 40th anniversary reissue. D.O.A. definitely, fits that standard definition of punk, but these guys were really making some good music. And, that's their names. In fact, that's something I wanted to kind of show with this. So, it comes with the original inserts, and so we've got a lyric sheet, of the grainy black and white photo. But then, okay, so we've got the names of the band members, all right? So we've got, Joey Shithead, okay? Randy Rampage. And then we've got, Chuck Biscuits. And then, to me, the one guy in the band that had the somewhat mainstream name, Dave Gregg, you look at his photo, to me, he's the most disturbing looking character, of the bunch. Very, very standard name, but, you look at him and then the composition of the photo as well is like, but good stuff. D.O.A. Nice to have it reissued. Now, this one falls more into post-punk grunge. And this was kind of like a VCLT that someone sent me. They're not a member of the vinyl community, but, they knew about my interest in record collecting, and they sent me some records. They sent me 2 jazz records, which I did a previous video on. But they also sent me this, Failure, and the release is Comfort, which is Failure's debut. And this album, and this band was very, very influential in the grunge scene. And they certainly have these elements of punk and, with the grunge, the distortion and with the guitars and the fuzz. But they also put in a little, math rock sensibility with some of the songs. The time signatures are unusual, not your simple 4/4 or 2/4 types of songs. They also have the recording has this airiness because it's a pretty standard feature, I have found anyway, when you got Steve Albini being the sound engineer. He has a way of making these recordings that are, the separation between instruments is pretty pronounced, and sometimes other instruments will come forward like the bass or drums. And so it's very much, to me, kind of a signature sound. When I'm listening to a record, I'm going, wow, this sounds like Steve Albini was the sound engineer with that. He did that very much with his band, Big Black. You can definitely hear that. And he also was, I think, the original sound engineer for Nirvana's In Utero. And then before the album was released, the tapes, the masters were re-engineered to kind of remove that sound, I guess. If you have the big deluxe edition release of In Utero, that's like 3 albums with a lot of extra material, it contains the original Steve Albini mixes, so you can hear that. But anyway, the band didn't really like that sound, and so in their next albums, they didn't use Steve Albini, and that's happened before with some bands that Steve Albini was the sound engineer for. They didn't like the way he did that kind of separation of each of the players. Slint, for example, their bass player, their original bass player, when their first album, Tweez, was released, he quit because he didn't like the way Albini engineered the record, and he didn't like the way the bass sounded. And Steve Albini wasn't the only one that kind of would do that and would get reactions from the band members of, whoa, we don't sound like that. Martin Hammett and Chris Nagel, who the producer and sound engineer for Joy Division, the kind of the same reaction there. The band members initially didn't like the way the record came out because it didn't sound like what they play or how they sound when they play live. And they grew to become more accustomed to Hannett's influence in the production, of their recordings. Because, when you think about it, for most music fans, I think we expect records, a studio production, to be clear or, have a particular sound. And then when we go to a live show, we don't want to hear how it sounds on the record necessarily, So we get a different oral experience when we go see the band live. And when the band is playing, all the time and they haven't been in the studio much, hearing themselves on a record can be jarring, I guess. I can see how it can be jarring because that's not how they hear themselves when they're on stage. Anyway, they weren't happy with the sound presentation that Steve Albini gave them. So in subsequent albums, they dropped him and had other people involved. This album is their debut. And what I have seen in terms of, like the All Music Guide and some other websites, the rating of their subsequent albums is much, much higher. This one, it's maybe 3 out of 5 stars. And then their other releases get 4 stars or 5 stars. And I think this is just a really great album. I'm really happy to have received it because I had never heard of Failure before. And if this is considered their weakest release, I can't wait to find some more and begin listening to it. I mean, a couple of my favorite songs on here include Macaque, which has this really strong, ponderous beat and this oscillating, strong guitar noise. And then, there's switching between periods of somewhat quiet and then, the tension comes back with the guitars and a lot of feedback. The song Screen Man, very strong bass line in the opening. And then the guitar brings in this really powerful wall of fuzz with this really soothing, repetitive melody that's kind of in there. But then in the middle of the song, you get this kind of guitar solo where the sound of the guitar is now coming out very clear and clean. But then it finishes with this feedback and noise and grinding and it's just really, really strong. The song Swallow 2 has lots of distortion. And the guitar line, the guitar part is slightly out of scale. And I really like that kind of outside playing, particularly with a guitar player. And, it's really famous with a lot of piano players like Thelonious Monk, really very much outside the scale or the key that the song is in. Sometimes the band has this Nirvana, even a Pixies kind of feel to it, but they were really very unique in terms of their sound in the grunge scene. And apparently they were really very, very influential. And they have these interesting little segues between songs, like between it's between the songs Muffled Snaps and Kindred. there's this transition where there's someone in a pool and you hear them getting out of the pool, and then, you know, their feet, wet feet slapping on the tile. You can tell it's an indoor pool. And then they go down to a diving board and, you know, they jump on the diving board and into the water, you know, and then it goes into the next song, Kindred, which has some very, very mathy drum rhythm keeping going on in it. Anyway, I'm really happy that they sent me this Failure. I will definitely be looking for more of that. And then last thing I want to show is another album that's been on my list for a really, really long time. And that is the debut album by Jets to Brazil, which is the Orange Rhyming Dictionary. Really interesting title, the Orange Rhyming Dictionary. I mean, I can remember from virtually every junior high school and high school English class, you know, orange was the word that has no other words that have a direct rhyme. I mean, orange storage, it's a near rhyme, but it's not a direct rhyme like can, man, than, you know what it, so I thought that was pretty interesting title to this. And then the songs, they're more of an indie post-punk, I guess people might classify. I mean, I'm not gonna put this in the same cubicles where I keep my punk collection. And I'm not gonna put Failure in there too, because they are grunge, even though I think grunge is essentially punk with better fuzz and better distortion. But Jets to Brazil this is a double album, really, really strong. And it's nice that they've got it. It's a 1998 album. It's nice that they have this reissue now, because original releases are fetching $100 or more. So it was sweet to get this for less than $20. Because I found a eBay vendor that if you buy $60 worth of records, then you get an additional 20% off, and the shipping is free, and the prices are already starting at reasonable ranges from like $18 to $25. So you get that 20% off. It, you know, really brings things down. But anyway, nice, really, really good stuff. If you haven't listened to Jets to Brazil, look them up on YouTube. Same with Failure. Look them up on YouTube and listen to them. I think you'll enjoy them if you like that punkish indie rock sound, grunge, post-punk sound. You will enjoy them. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you have any other recommendations in this murky genre, we might say, hey, leave a comment. Share your thoughts with me. I appreciate it when people do that. But always remember to pray for the people inside your head, for they won't be there when you're dead.